Good afternoon. Good evening, rather. It's 6 o'clock at night. Tonight, we are honored to sit down with a trailblazing leader, a champion for communities, and a voice for women in politics. Texas State Representative Lulu Flores. Her journey reflects resilience, purpose, and a deep commitment to public service. Representative Flores, welcome to the National Women's Political Caucus Candid Conversation.
Thank you, Deidre. I'm happy to be here.
Look, so excited. Look, we're going to really get into it, but I want people to know not only is she a state representative, but she's a past president of the National Women's Political Caucus and somebody that I call often when I need advice. So, Lulu, thank you for your service. And so we're just going to get into it. Take us
Okay.
back to the beginning, Lulu. What shaped Lulu Flores before politics?
Well, back to the beginning, Laredo, Texas, border town on the border of Mexico and Texas. And well, I was the last of nine kids, and I grew up, loving animals and the outdoors, and I, playing outdoors and sports. And I had a calling for justice early on. I'm a Libra, after all. And so, always being the last of nine, getting blamed for stuff, I was always like, no, this isn't fair. I need to fight for justice. And it really would bother my sensibilities when I was unfairly accused of things, only because they thought the youngest could get away with stuff. So they
And
wouldn't
normally the youngest does get away with
and they
everything.
wouldn't punish me, right? Because but I was like so incensed because it's like I was like, that's not right and it's not fair. And also, I grew up wanting to do whatever the boys would do, and actually, I wanted to be better than they were because I could run faster and climb trees faster and do all that stuff. So that was me in a nutshell. Very competitive because we had a big family. We're all very competitive. I, like I said, grew up loving animals. We didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't have a lot of toys or dolls. So I played with cats and dogs, and we had lots of stray cats, and we had one indoor cat that came with the house when they finally moved to a bigger house when I was born, the last of nine. That was what it was. I was a big tomboy, as I said, and always, felt like I could, if what anything they could do, I could do better, kind of thing. And always, and I was, I guess, a Miss Bossy Pants from the beginning too. So
So, sounds like a full childhood, though.
yeah.
So Lulu, who inspired your and what inspired your commitment to public service?
Well, my parents, obviously, my mom and dad were huge role models for me. My father was a lawyer. He was self-taught. He did not go to college or law school. He back then you could sit for the bar, you could study. He did apprentice with a law firm, and he did take some correspondence courses. So he wanted to be a lawyer, and so he was a big role model for me, but he was also very involved in the community, and so was my mom, and with their church and just in the community in LULAC. My father was one of the founding members of LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens. Uh,
Yes.
Ironically, he wasn't a citizen yet. He was naturalized because our family had ranches across the border back in the day, and he was born in Guerrero, Mexico, in Tamaulipas, but he naturalized when he became a lawyer and started practicing law and the whole thing. But he went to all the meetings from Laredo. They would drive from Laredo, Corpus Christi to start, LULAC Council number one. And later he served as an officer for LULAC Council number 12 in Laredo, and then as a national secretary a few times. So he was very active in the Knights of Columbus and other church groups. My mother was a Guadalupana, and she was a Lady Lulac, I call them, because back then they were auxiliaries. They weren't full-fledged members back in the day. But both of them were also very, giving. Like I said, we're a big family. We didn't have a lot. Daddy had to work really hard. But they gave we gave what we could. to others who were less fortunate. And so just having that as an example, and also the fact that my dad also, besides being a lawyer, he ran for office. He was on the local school board, and then he advanced to becoming the tax collector assessor, where he served for 20 years. So I grew up playing with his little push cards when he was running. I was about 5 or 6 when he was decided to make the leap to tax assessor, collector, and so that was like, my early beginnings. Used to go play at his law firm, at his law office. I couldn't call it a firm, but it was a law office. And on Saturdays, because he had to work nights and weekends because he had 2 jobs. He was a public servant, and then early in the morning he'd go to work before he had to go to the county. He'd work some on his lunch hour, and then he would then go back after he finished up at 5 at the county, and he'd go and see clients and then bring work home and work at home, and or go back to the office after he had dinner, so and worked on Saturdays. So grew up playing in his law office.
So it sounds like the law and then the advocacy piece is
Yeah,
like in your DNA based on your dad's history and then your mom.
yeah, and I'm a lot like my dad. He's kind of an introvert, but yet uh when he had to, he served the public, and we're both Libras. We're like, our birthdays are a week apart, so I have his temper too. But very disciplined. He was also, just he grew up, they were depression babies, and he grew up especially hard because his mom lost her dad early on, was actually killed by an
Mm,
ex-Texas Ranger that was leasing property from them. So when he was sick, so he had to go live with his grandmother at the time because she was distraught. And so that was a very, it was a very austere and obviously very sad upbringing. And he was the oldest of three boys and a girl. And so he learned responsibility really early. And because they lost their grandfather, and his mother uh, was very, missed her dad a lot, and wanted to make sure they kept the ranch and the cows, and sent her husband, who was an accountant, to go, raise cattle. And that didn't go well. So, they were mortgaging, hawking, to just try to save the ranch. And so later he and his 3 brothers had to, pay back everything.
yeah,
So not only did he have to raise his family, he also had to make sure that we didn't lose our rent, at the time, which was, a land grant that they had gotten from, Mexico. And so, it was a austere upbringing, and so he was very, very um, frugal, let's just say. Had to be, he had so many mouths to feed. And
yeah.
so he's a pay as you go guy. It's one good thing I got it from him too. We grew up, and we made things last as long as they could.
And so, Lulu, do you think that when did you realize, like growing up in the household with your dad and your mom and everything that your dad was able to achieve, when did you realize that you wanted to run for office?
Oh, probably about the third or fourth grade.
Well, you sound like me. I think I started running in the fourth grade. So
Yeah, I was like I said, I was always in the playground, sticking up for everybody, and everybody said, "Ah, you ought to be a lawyer," because I was arguing my points. I was like, and I had to do it somewhere, because if my family, that always say, "Oh, just be quiet. You're just a kid. You don't know anything." So I had to practice my skills on the playground. But I said I was kind of a bossy pants and stuff, but I always really would stand up for anybody who was, I felt like was being the underdog. And I started, in fourth grade, beautifying the campus. We started planting a garden with Sister Frances. And so that started my hopefully my community service, and getting involved. But yeah, early on, because people said, you gotta be a lawyer. You're always arguing. So I
so
think I obviously had that.
So has your identity as a woman, as a Latina leader, helped shape your path too?
Oh, absolutely. I had some amazing role models. Well, I had an amazing role model who ended up, besides my sisters being my first mentors and role models, my oldest sister, who always also was my godmother because she was 13 years older than I was, and so she was my confirmation godmother. She was a teacher, a math teacher, and while she was, she decided she was going to college. And so she was the first one. So by the time I was 5, she was my pen pal. I was writing her letters while she was at college. So I said, well, I'm going to college too, obviously. And then the brother right after her became a lawyer, went to UT Law. And I said, well, I'm going to UT Law too. And another sister who's 2 ahead of me, went to UT Law. And she was always real into politics. And she was like, when Kennedy was running, I was still pretty young, but she was, all over it, and she was just very political. And so she became my first political role model in the sense of blazing a trail and joining the Women's Political Caucus, the Texas Women's Political Caucus in 1971. She was the first to do that. And so that's how she ended up getting her job with who ended up being my boss later, was the first Mexican American woman ever elected to the Texas Legislature, House of Representatives. She was from Kingsville, Texas, Irma Rangel. And Angie was with the caucus, and they gave her a whopping $1,000, to run for office. And so when time came for her to hire somebody to help her, she'd never been to Austin. She didn't know anything about serving. She had been her county, Democratic chair. She was active but at home, but Austin and the capital was different. But my sister had work prior to going to law school for the governor's office, and so she with the EEO office, and she actually knew the Capitol, and so one of her other Latinas told Irma, "You have to hire a Latina, and this is the person you got to hire because she's in law school now, and she's really smart, and she knows the Capitol." And so she did. So then the rest was history, because after my sister graduated law school, I was 2 years behind her, and she went to clerk for federal judge in Houston. And Irma was like, I can't survive without you. And she said, well, I got a sister. And then that's how it started. But I was a second year law student, and I'd never been to the Capitol and didn't know anything. But you know what? I learned on the job, and what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, as they say.
But Lulu, how did you balance it though? I mean, second year law student, and then it sounds like a big time job, right?
Oh, hell yeah. I was her chief of
Yeah.
staff. I was running the staff. I was running the office, and yeah, yeah, it was tough. And my sister Angie was really good and really smart and had done this stuff, and so here I am, like a total newbie. I mean, she had hired me the summer before she left, and I like was, I don't know, playing around trying to write memos and stuff. And then it's like, okay, here it is, kind of dumped in the grease. But we did have an administrative assistant who was, an administrative secretary who had worked in the Capitol and knew everybody. So she was really good at getting us connected. But Irma wanted me to be, in charge of the staff and do everything. Everything had to come through me. And I took 2 classes that semester. You got special permission if you were working at the Capitol to go ahead and take less classes. I had taken summer school before, and I took summer school after. But I took a class. I think it was 4 or 5 days a week. I took basic commercial law at lunchtime. So I'd leave the Capitol, run to the law school, take this horrible basic commercial law class, and I'd sleep during the class literally because I was exhausted. And then on Friday evenings we had a legislative seminar which actually helped us, and we actually tracked the bills and legislation we were working on. So I just like, you fake it till you make it, and I had two Latina women. I mean, I think there were 2 or 3. Back then the chief of staffs were called administrative assistants because most of them were women, and so the titles didn't
Right.
come with the job. But anyway, we were the ones that ran the office, and I had two wonderful Latinas that were there ahead of me, and I would call every day, like, "Well, now what do I do? Or what do I do about this?" But I managed and I survived, and as I said, not without incident, but for the most part, it went well. And then, continued to work for her years late. I came back to work for her. And so she was just an amazing woman. And actually, once you go to work at the Capitol and just seeing it, you get bitten by the bug to be in the legislature. So that's what set my trajectory in law, was to just work on policy and legislation and legislative policy. And I took subsequent jobs as governmental affairs directors at the State Bar of Texas, and then later at the Railroad Commission. I also worked in their alternative fuels policy and then also in their governmental affairs division. So that's what sort of shaped me. But as a Latina, we didn't have a lot of role models back then. I was fortunate that my sister was ahead of me and had blazed that trail, and we did it with Irma, who was like the first Latina. And so she was, having, and not that many, not a lot of women either, and not a lot of Latinos and not a lot of African Americans. So the blacks and the Mexicans worked, no Asians back then, and they worked together because they had to, because back then even the Democrats were super conservative. We had those super ultra conservative redneck Texan,
My word.
and
And
so
so,
it
so,
was
so, so, so having that job really prepared you, and then it gave you that mindset of this is what I may want to do later, right? Run for this Texas legislature.
absolutely, yeah. I got that. I got bitten early, and I had always said, "Oh, I'm going to go back to Laredo, and I'm going to move and work with my dad. I'm gonna run for mayor. I'm going to clean up the city because we had our big patron system back then. The mayor had been there for 20 years, and you know he, he ran things the way he ran things. It was like total, one party control the whole thing, and um, I was always arguing with my father, who used to tell me, "You don't know anything about it. You're just a kid. You don't understand politics." I'm like, "Yeah, but he's corrupt, and I'm, So I figured I was going to come back and clean it up, but well, I ended up, veering a little bit, and unfortunately, my dad passed away when I was going
Mm.
to go work for him. He died, and so I wasn't. I ended up succeeding, I mean, taking on his office, but it didn't last long because I was just out of law school, and
Okay.
it was crazy. I did the best I could, called my cousins, "What do I do here?" Same, it was kind of the same thing with my newly minted legal career. I was having to rely on my cousins who were also lawyers and just have them check my grade my papers and make sure I was doing everything right. And I was just winging it, faking it till I
Yeah.
made it. But his clients were clinging to me because my father had a 40-year practice. And it was a small practice, but it was very, he was good he was a counselor and to his clients. And so it was difficult to leave him, but I ended up having to do that. And I ended up going back to work with Irma and had a much more successful run afterwards, after I'd had, a little bit of experience and a little more, a few more years behind me. And so we ended up having a great relationship, and it was, wonderful.
But still, it speaks to your father's legacy. I mean, 40 years of owning a law firm, and then to have his children go on and become successful attorneys. Maybe not, I mean, you worked in the government relations field, and, worked for the railroad, and then ended up deciding you wanted to go ahead and be in the Texas legislature. And are you in your second term now? Lulu? Is this your second term?
I second term, and I'm running for reelection for my third term. Yes, so we have to run every 2 years, and so yeah. I didn't have a primary opponent. I'm grateful for that, but I do have a Republican running against me. Everybody tells me it's a safe seat, but I'm always one that doesn't take anything for granted and works really hard and making sure that I'm gonna work to make sure I win in the general, because it is a mostly Democratic seat, but you never know. And
Well,
is growing so fast that the demographics in my district in particular, because a lot of it was rural, so it's growing at really fast, and there's a lot of people moving into Austin, and a lot of people that were here are moving out. Particularly, I represent the Latino district, and it's still the Latino district, with the highest percentage of Mexican Americans and Latinos, and but nevertheless, it's becoming gentrified. People, the affordability issues in Austin, people are moving away to the burbs, to Buda, to Kyle at south, and to Pflugerville and Round Rock in the north, and so the community is shifting. So the demographics are changing. So, like I said, you don't take anything for granted anyway, and I never do. So I've come really close, because this isn't the first time. I ran for office 35 years ago, the first time, and I came really close. I tied for second place and missed the runoff by 8 votes. So
oh,
I'm a good lesson for people that say, how you say your vote matters. Every single vote matters. And then the second time I ran, you know, 10 years later, I lost in the runoff by 117 votes. So it was, close but no cigar. And it was really tough. Those were really hard lessons. Losing is not easy. And you just have to dust yourself off and pick yourself up and keep going. And then here you go 20 years later, after that race, the person that had beat me then was still serving, decided to run for Congress. And somebody called me and says, Lulu, he's thinking about running for Congress. You need to do this. It's your turn. You should have had that seat 20 years ago. And so I just said, I said, really? I'm on my downslide. I'm already going thinking about retirement here, and you're asking me to go climbing uphill again. So then I thought, let me sleep on it. Let me talk to my husband. I woke up the next morning and I thought, something feels different. I don't know if it was the cosmos, telling me that maybe this was my time. And I just, felt better about it. I had already been the head of the caucus, and I'd had all this other experience. And I'd helped every single woman that was in elected office in Austin and Travis County get elected, and then some in other parts. So, I think, okay, well, okay, I think I'll do it. And I did it. And there was 7 of us. And I'm like,
oh,
I'm not getting into another runoff. I am winning this hour. So I worked my tail off and block walked, and I won with 60% of the vote. And so it was just, and I was just kind of, I waited till like 10 o'clock, and everybody's there calling it. And I'm like, nope, I'm waiting. I'm waiting till they actually officially call it before I believe this, because it's like, and I block walked till about, the polls close at 7. I was knocking on doors at 6:50 p.m. and I was dragging the last person out to the polls. And
but,
yeah.
but but Lulu, that's a case study in perseverance. I mean, if you don't win the first time, what did you say? 8 votes, then it was 100 and something votes. I mean, you just have to keep doing it until you
Yeah.
win.
Yeah. See
And
that first
you learn
time.
something every time, right? You learn something every time.
Oh, I was so new when I ran that first time. It was 13 of us, and it was crazy, and it was the Latino seat, but you had an Anglo running for it. But the Anglo was the first openly gay person to ever run for an office. So it was really, contested, and it was tough because, and I had all the Hispanic gay folks were behind me,
Yeah.
and because I obviously, but they try to paint me as being an anyway. We lost. I was 8 votes shy of making it into the runoff, and so
Mm.
my husband always says, had you been in the runoff, you would have won, because the other guy had all of this baggage, hadn't paid taxes, child support, and all this other stuff. And had tried to get me to say, because I was the woman, you need to just back off. I'm the only one that can win the seat. I said, I
Oh my
beg to
goodness.
differ.
I've heard
I'm
that.
the only one that can win the seat, because I
Yeah.
don't have baggage, and I know you do. And he swore to me he didn't. And so I said, well, I will never be able to live with myself. It was the first tie ever in Travis County, so they paid for the runoff. So you could
Mm.
either have a recount, flip a coin, or somebody gets out. And so I said, I will never sleep another night if I flip a coin and I lose. And
Yeah.
so we had a recount, and that's how the 8 vote difference was. So, they had counted 8 extra votes for me, and they weren't really there. So it was like, oh,
Oh,
well. Yeah, it was sad. But, lots of lessons learned,
yeah.
yeah, and just saying, well, I'm gonna do this again. But after, waiting on, this other guy for 20 years, and I was just like, I'm not so sure. I'm like, hey, I'm already 67 years old, but and somebody called me who happened to be the daughter of somebody who had broken rank with a group and supported me back in the day. His daughter actually was working campaigns now and was really talented. And she's the one that called me and said, "You got to do this, and I'll work with you for you." And I said, "Okay, all
Well,
right."
I'm glad she called because I mean everything that you've learned over your in politics and in your professional life put you in play for this position. And so especially with what's happening now in Texas in the legislature, right? What are you
Yep.
what are you facing now? Like what are some of the most important issues facing Texans right now in the state legislature?
Well, I mean, it's pretty much across the country, but it's interesting, affordability is huge in Texas, and I talked about gentrification. Austin is becoming the most expensive city, one of the most expensive cities in the country. It's kind of ridiculous how fast it's growing and how many people are moving in here. And we've got so many billionaires moving here, including one of my, who so happens to be in my district, Tesla. Yeah.
Elon in your district?
Well, his factory is in the
In my
Gigafactory
district. Okay.
district.
He's
Yes.
he's got he's got a place here in Memphis now and
Yeah. So
South Haven, Mississippi. Yeah.
So there's, but affordability is a huge issue. Even though Texas has the gas, the oil here, the gas prices are surging. There's inflation, there's rising unemployment, the housing is astronomically expensive. And so, we have a very good city council, and we've been working on affordability issues and trying to make sure that we build affordable housing. And we, had bond elections after bond elections to put more money into affordable housing. And so we are really trying to do our best, but that's huge. And I think that's rampant across the country. We're also in Texas, though, we have a systemic loss of freedoms and rights,
Yeah.
starting with government overreach into our daily lives and into our personal lives. They're minimizing, they're basically decimating reproductive rights and complicating healthcare decisions. And, they're overriding, bodily autonomy, and they're just everything. And they're trying to, what they don't like about Austin is because we are the blueberry and the tomato soup of Texas, pretty much. But, they do not like, and so they're trying to now have control. They're trying to override local control. They're saying even though we're home rule cities and are able to make our own decisions, and our local councils are should be, the voters elected them to do the things that they're doing, the state is constantly just trying to put the kibosh on them. We need minimum wage increases here. We gotta, we have DEI bans now, diversity, equity, inclusion. I mean, they're starving, our resources to the schools. They're not funding public schools. They passed a voucher bill to get private schools here. They want Christian nationalist schools going. They got book bans and drag bans and bans across everything. And so it's Texas is kind of a really uh in a dire spot, and the Democrats are not. There was 62 of us to 88 of them, and in the House. Senate, I don't remember their numbers, but obviously
Yeah.
they're also. And then we have a lieutenant governor who just makes up the rules every session because he's a kind of a dictator. So it's just really, really a dire situation. But I think with what's happening on the national front right now, the war and everything else, our voters turned out in record numbers. The
I
Democratic
saw
voters
I
came out,
saw
and so
that.
we are hoping upon hope that we can, build on this momentum in the midterms.
Let me just say, Lulu, the lines were so long. I was watching national news and I was
Mhm.
just so happy that people were staying in line and waiting to make sure that they cast their vote. And so,
Yeah.
if we can get that seat in the US Senate coming out of Texas, that might be, you know, absolutely amazing. And
And trying to getting people to vote, even in spite of all of the efforts and all of the bills that are passed to try to limit people's ability to vote. They are just, they do not want mail-in ballots, and
no, and the Save
everything
Act.
that worked perfectly during COVID, now all of a sudden, no, 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 you can't have them. You got to go, they're just making it harder and harder and harder on folks and on poor folks. And now, they've got this thing that they're doing to women now, that you can't, if you have a different name than your husband's and it's not on, it's like, what? Now you got to go have a passport, and it's going to impact women. It's going to impact, folks, low income folks, and
Yes.
just anybody. So it's just,
Voter suppression. It's just voter
totally. No,
suppression.
no, and it's been session after session after session, and we have to fight every session. And so we're hoping for a little bit more breathing room this next coming session. That we're hopeful, but
But Lulu, let me ask, like in this very, political, polarized environment, how do you navigate it? How do you figure out how to can you in Texas work across party lines to get something done?
yeah, well, my history, the fact that I grew up at the Capitol, and I grew up at a time when even the Democrats were the enemy sometimes, but we always had a very bipartisan, Republicans and Democrats always worked together. It was more issue based. And as terrible as it is right now, probably about 90%, 85% of the stuff that we do is not necessarily red meat issues. And so we can
Okay.
together. And since I grew up having Republican friends and people that I, have had friends for years, and people who have been Democrats and switched to the Republican Party, and I've known them forever since they were young. Some of them are still serving now, and I was like, you used to be a Democrat, and so
Right.
but we have personal friendships. I used to run with those guys. I was a big runner, and we used to run together. And we always had this, so the strategy that I had used was get to know somebody for who they are before you even learn about their politics. Don't go read their websites. Don't look at this. And especially people coming into my class. It's like get to know somebody, for who they are, find some things in common, talk about pets and sports and food and things that you may have commonalities about, and try to build a relationship like that, because that's sort of how I was raised at the Capitol, right? And so I've always had that ability. I mean, there's some people that are just like, oh my God, yes, and we are like 180 degrees apart on the politics, but you just all have to work together, because there's lots of things that you can, you can work together to do some positive things. And so the more you are able to have that attitude and build those relationships, the more, I have some very conservative chairmen in my committees, and yet they're very graceful to me, and they're very fair, and they let me speak my mind, and I'm not going to get ugly about it, but they know where I stand on things. When they ask me to vote on certain things, I'm like, sorry, I cannot do this. You need to
Right.
apply. But other things, we have things in common. Like I serve on the Judiciary Committee, and my chair, even though he's a very, has a lot of right wing positions, we love the judicial system. We love the rule of law. We appreciate our judiciary. So we find those common ground areas where we want to see raises for our judiciary. We want to make sure that the administration of justice is fair, and he's very passionate about child abuse issues and spout women's abuse issues and things. So in those issues we can work very well together, and on things like me, I have animal rights bills and things like that.
Right.
And so, and they help me, and they will help me because I we can work together, and now we have a very cordial relationship, and that's how it is. And I'm vice chair now of the Cultural Recreation Tourism Committee.
Oh, wonderful.
And so, I work very well again with because no Democratic chairs this time. That was the rules of the game of engagement at the beginning of the session. So, but they did say, okay, only Democrats can be vice chairs. And so, to my surprise, I was named a vice chair because I think I was the longest sitting member on that committee, even though I would only been there 2 years, right? So it turns out, and so he and I work very well together, and I'm cordial, and I push and I try to get Democratic bills set for hearings and things like that. And he will, sometimes he's yeah, or whatever. But for the most part, he works with me, and because he knows, and we've co-sponsored bills together. We do
Oh,
a
that's great.
bike trail built together, and and things like that. So yeah, we you got to protect deer and parks and everything else in Texas, and we agree on those issues. And so the things that you can agree on, and I have a sense of humor. I'm always cutting up and saying jokes and poking the bear a little bit, and it's okay. It's okay. It's okay to do that. It's okay to do
That's
that.
awesome. That's awesome. So now let's transition real quick because I've got to
Okay.
talk about the work that you've done over the years with the National Women's Political Caucus. So, what did it mean to serve as president of the National Women's Political Caucus, Lulu?
Well, it was a huge honor, to be elected, and it really sort of gave legitimized all of the work I had done for in the caucus. I had been on the board for 15 years. I back in the day when I joined, I was a younger pup. I was about 30, and in my early 30s, and I was considered a young woman there, and all the older women latched onto me, and they were mentoring me and holding me up. And, women from Minnesota and all over the country, saying, oh, they find a young woman, they're great. But they wanted, they were very interested, and they, helped mentor me. And there were some really, people I was scared of and very like, oh my God, the, political planning chair was like, rah, she was a tough cigarette smoking, whiskey swilling Texan, and she was a tough old broad. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so scared of her. But you know what? Even she became a good friend. And, but, after having been there so long and just gone through, the different phases and have been vice president of diversity and training because Shaloma brought me up. She was leaving that position to do something else. And so she mentored me, and I was always the Hispanic caucus chair. And so, it kind of, they sort of uplifted me. And yes, I was asked to run because I was like not going to run for first vice president, and I had, Janie Von Kennel and Donna Lent and other people that said, yes, you got to do this because that's going to be the position for them. And then they really kind of just uplifted me and stood with me, and we pulled it off. And so, the rest is history. I served for 2 terms, and was successful in raising money and raising our visibility. And while I was first vice president, I helped Linda a lot because, she had a job with the ACLU and couldn't always be available. So I would fly to Washington and attend all these things and get in, the feminist majority's face and get into, and now, and I said, it's me again, I'm back. NWPC is here to stay, and here we are. And so I built a relationship with them because every time they were having press conferences up, I'd show up, or conferences and things. When Linda couldn't, I was there. And then as president, I just continued that. And then I also brought them in to help us co-sponsor our different events and help us. And then it helped that I was outgoing president on our 40th year, which was a big year. So we made it a big party to celebrate, and we brought in all of the founding mothers.
Wow.
Anyone that we could find that was still alive were invited to come and share in the festivities. And so we were able to get Ellie Smeal and you know Kim Gandy and back in the day. Oh God, I'm forgetting some names right now. Siobhan Bennett, Sam Bennett, with the Women's Campaign Fund. We worked together. We started working.
Yeah.
I was showing up and building those bridges. It was great. It was great.
Well, we're year 55 now, so it's just amazing that we're still going, right? It's just and we're so proud of that. And so I guess a few more questions for you, Lulu, and then we're going to wrap this thing up. But why is it critical that more women, especially women of color, run for office?
Well, it's always been the same thing, If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And we, as founding member, one of our founding members, Bella Abzug used to say, if they don't open the door for you, kick it down. And as Shirley Chisholm used to say, if there's not a seat at the table, bring your own
Bring your own
chair.
chair.
And that's what I say too, is like, hell yeah, kick down the door, bring your own chair, make a seat for yourself. And it's still that way because, some of the challenges of running as a woman back in the day when I first ran, when I was in my 30s, and, raising money and women being invisible and not having all those connections and women being very frugal. But now women spend money.
Yeah.
Uh, used to tell them what you spend on shoes, you should spend on candidates. Well, now women spend thousands of dollars on their damn shoes. I don't. But a lot of them do. So now they can give thousands of dollars to women candidates, right? So it's not as hard. But back then you used to call it pin money, right? And nobody wanted to get rid of their pin money to give. And so breaking into the old boys club was tough. And breaking into the old party clubs, was tough because they always, people are comfortable with who they grow up with and are hanging out with. So guess what? The men would bring up the young men and they wouldn't look at the women. And so we just had to keep beating down the doors and pushing it. And you still have macho culture, even if people are more enlightened and men are more enlightened, it's still that feeling of entitlement and women still having to, really be pushy broads because they're not listening. I love the saying, it's a thing. Yeah, bitches get things done. You're damn right I'm a bitch.
I get things done, right? Well, Lulu, let me ask, when your time in public service is complete, what impact do you hope that you've made serving in all these capacities that you've had? What kind of impact do you hope you leave?
Well, I hope the impact will be that I have helped women, young women, especially because I love to mentor and I speak, I hold panels and that's always been what I've done. Even young men, I've just, making sure that, the next generation is there and willing to serve, because, we need to show up. We need to be present. Need to be at the table. We need to have our voices heard. We need to make sure that our voices are heard, and we need to contribute and we need to help our communities. So I hope that I'll be remembered for somebody who like to share power and help people achieve it, and as somebody who helped, you know, make people's lives better. And even if I just help, one person, that's an accomplishment in and of itself. So I would say all the little things add up. And so any little positive thing that you can do for someone is a worthwhile act.
If you had to describe your leadership style in one word, Lulu, what would that word be?
One word? Oh God, I hate these things, but one word. I would say servant leader. It's just who I am. It's in my DNA. Um, Service, not and I'll expand on that because it's just about you lead by example. And you also uh serve your community. I always tell people when I'm campaigning, I said, I don't own this seat. This seat belongs to the people. I have the
Exactly.
honor to be selected at this time to serve you now. It's not going to be mine, that's up to the people who I represent. And I am a representative. I am not your leader, and I am not the person that sets the agenda.
Final thoughts, Representative Flores, before we wrap this up.
Oh, you didn't ask my favorite question about
Which
what
one
book.
is it? Which who is it, the
Well,
book question or the mentor question? Which one?
I talked about my mentor, your Madame Hell, and my mother-in-law was a great mentor because when I first met her, she was a dynamo, and then, of course, she introduced me to my husband. She pretended it was she was a yenta. What can I say? So, but no, the book thing, because I thought, what am I going to say? I read so much. I mean, I'm a voracious reader, but you know what shaped me? I
Which one?
realized Scarlet Letter. The Scarlet
Ah,
we were in the ninth grade. I was at a Catholic school, but my teacher was a lay teacher, and that book was assigned. We read it, and I was so pissed off at the fact, that's where I realized that I was mad at the patriarchy and how dare they get away with what they're doing and shame the woman into taking full responsibility and getting away with it as men. So I was furious, and I wrote this scathing, paper. And so she wrote on the margin, she says, have you heard of the feminine mystique? And
oh,
so that's where I learned about what a feminist was. Because she said, do you know what a feminist is? And she wrote it on my margin. And I was like, I don't think I read the feminist mystique right then. But nevertheless, I found that there was a word for how I felt.
yeah.
Oh, I am a feminist, have been since I was 5 years old, always saying, why do the boys get to do all the good stuff? I want to be an NFL player. I want to be able to be a lawyer. I want to do this. I can do things just as well as they can. So that book kind of really brought it home because I learned I was a feminist. And so that's what it was. And so there you go. It
The
shaped
Scarlet
me.
Letter. The Scarlet Letter. I love it.
Yeah.
So, Representative Flores, final thoughts before we wrap up.
Final thoughts. Well, there is hope for the future. I believe that what I would tell some young people today, young women especially, is that care, show up, find your passion, do the things that you love to do, find out what you are good at and what you love to do. And if it leads you to a life in public service or leads you to a life in political life, it's because, you have found what you care about and you are building towards that. And I would just say, show up because the world is run by those who show up. Another one of my mother-in-law's favorite quotes. And because if you're not there, you're not going to be able to shape the world, right? And also just try. And I think, as long as we try and as long as we keep pushing, I do believe that we can overcome, and si se puede. And
Love
that's the
it.
Puertas words. So we can.
I love it. Texas State Representative Lulu Flores.
Radiant
I
positivity.
love it. And that t-shirt is purple, y'all. You need to know it's purple.
Spray with my light.
Um, State Representative Flores reminds us that leadership is not just about holding office. Its leadership is not just about it's about lifting others up. It's about breaking barriers and shaping a future where everyone has a voice. Representative Flores, thank you so much. And I want to invite people because this will be on YouTube, our candid conversation. Anyone can listen to this interview. If you're not a member of the National Women's Political Caucus, we want you to join. I invite you to join. Just
Become
visit the website, right?
a member.
Exactly. Thank you, Rep. And visit our website at nwpc.org and become a member today. I'm Deidre Malone. I'm the president of the National Women's Political Caucus. Thank you for joining our candid conversation.